Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget, featuring the voices of Tandy Newton, Zachary Levi, Bella Ramsey, Miranda Richardson, Imelda Staunton, Lynn Ferguson, David Bradley, and Jane Horrocks, directed by Sam Bell. That's really his name, I'm not making that up. Now, I did watch this twice on Netflix, and yes, this movie is available on Netflix. So, let and the reviews are turning out pretty good, but is it as good as the original? Let's find out. Let's get into the movie. We recapped the first movie with Rocky, who sounded like Mel Gibson at first, but the truth is, he's voiced by Zachary Levi this time, as the new baby chicken is hearing the story while in the egg, while Ginger, voiced by Tandy Newton, decides not live in the past as the baby chicken hatches while getting itself in peril, but it has, as it turns out, it's a girl named Molly who's voiced by Bella Ramsey. While living in a paradise, as she's adventurous and is just like her mother growing up. And I do enjoy this opening as I do like the characters, as unfortunately some of them are not voiced by the same actors as Mel Gibson, of course, has for his personal reasons. Julia Swalla, I guess, is because she's getting a little bit older, and I don't want to sound mean, but it's unfortunately true. That's what and IMDb was telling me that she sounded old or something. I don't know what the story behind that is. I haven't seen her in years, so as the first movie was made 23 years ago, and I do like the claymation as it's fascinating to watch. Rocky makes popcorn from sunlight, which is a clever way to make popcorn in general, while Molly sees some trees being cut down and sees some trucks taking chickens to a chicken farm, and Ginger asks Mac, returning voice of Lynn Ferguson, Babs, returning voice of Jane Horrocks, and Bunty, returning voice of Imelda Staunton. So we have a few of them back to set up a meeting about hiding themselves and set up a trap for the humans while Rocky tells Molly a story about how he and Ginger met 23 years ago. And the next day comes, and Molly wants to leave the island, as this is almost an imitation of the first movie, but at the same time, it's harmless for the kids. But as an adult, it's harmless as the humor is not as clever as the first movie. Molly decides to escape from the island to go the land Ginger didn't want her to go to begin with, and she meets Frizzle, who's voiced by newcomer Josie Cedric Davies, who wants to go to the mysterious chicken farm as they get captured by a worker, and Frizzle is in my opinion kind of a bad influence. I don't really like her as much as the other characters. Ginger and Rocky and the other chickens go after Molly, and after and find her going to the farm factory, which seems pretty dangerous, particularly how tight security is. But that won't stop Ginger from going inside while the chickens gets a neck brace, but Molly and Frizzle doesn't get one as they get in the building with other chickens. Meanwhile, the free chickens need to learn details about the building as Rocky gets inside the building and gets shot at the security by the security, I mean. But he does make it, and Ginger hires Nick and Fetcher, the rats, voiced by different actors that I'm not going to bring up the names because I don't want to embarrass myself. And I like the return, and same goes with Fowler, who's voiced by David Bradley, who played Mr. Filch from the Harry Potter films. And I really like the returning characters, but the only character I don't like in this movie is Frizzle for reasons I brought up at one point in the show. Molly and Frizzle notices the inside characters are acting weird, while Dr. Fry sees they don't have neck braces, and the outside chickens get inside rocketing by rocketing the security guard and turning him into a no by putting a rocket on a security guard and turning him into a firework and sneaking in by the cloud that was a plane with Nick and Fetcher as they get inside the building and past the guards by taking a photo of one of the eyeballs of one of the security guards' eyeball, while Fowler tells stories of his army's days to a snail that tries to get away, which has some clever tricks. Nick and Fetcher find Rocky as they almost get fried by the garbage fire, but luckily gets out of that, which is clever to the point it is kind of funny. Frizzle gets a neck brace by Dr. Fry, dressing up like a giant chicken, as Molly, thank goodness, never gets one for the rest of the movie, as Frizzle acts as strange as the other inside chickens, and Molly tries to figure out what is happening. And I do like how clever the movie is at some points. Dr. Fry meets with Sir Eat-A-Lot, which is the name of a restaurant, but the corporate office businessman named Reginald meets him, with Molly and Ginger witnessing the meeting with them as they see an old enemy of the chickens named Mrs. Tweedy, returning voice of Miranda Richardson, which was kind of spoiled in the trailers, but her plan this time is to make chickens into nuggets, which is a food thing, like chicken nuggets, chicken McNuggets, you name it. Which I wish the reveal of Mrs. Tweedy wasn't in the trailer, as that felt spoiled, which is a bit of a problem for me. Reginald likes the nuggets so much that they would like to take the nuggets to the restaurant, while Molly and Ginger find each other, and Molly wants to save Frizzle's life, while Mrs. Tweedy spots Ginger and captures her, while Rocky, Nick, and Fetcher find Ginger being captured by Mrs. Tweedy, as she wants to transfer Ginger to a brainless chicken. And it works at first, but at the end she fights back, and so does Molly, while the other outside chicken sees Mrs. Tweedy is alive, and Rocky breaks into the laboratory and dances for Dr. Fry, while Ginger is the brainless chicken. And that made me laugh, as it was clever, and the movie does a good job at being clever, in my opinion. The outside chickens catch up with Molly and Ginger, as does Nick and Fetcher, and fall into a bunch of popcorn seeds, as Ginger turns back to normal, and Rocky jumps in without hearing the chicken saying, "Don't jump," but unfortunately he does jump in, and before they get killed by the grinder, Rocky gets an idea of getting heat from the popcorn seeds, as the chickens do as well, to turn into popcorn itself as they get out of the danger, which is a good and clever idea in my opinion. Ginger decides to get all the inside chickens out of the factory, including Frizzle, while Mrs. Tweedy is presenting for Reginald, and the chickens get the inside chickens out of the factory, as Ginger and Rocky distract Dr. Fry and grab the wrong remote, and Mrs. Tweedy sends all the inside chickens to the fryer, while Rocky and Ginger try to change them back to normal, but Mrs. Tweedy has the advantage, and the outside chickens, as well as Nick and Fetcher, try to push the inside chickens out of the machine, and Molly grabs the remote, and Mrs. Tweedy grabs Molly, and they almost get into the fryer for Molly's life, and Rocky almost kicks Mrs. Tweedy, but Ginger pushes the button and saves all the chickens, and Rocky saves their lives, and a cutter knocks out Mrs. Tweedy, and she goes in the machine, and the chickens escape with the truck, as the chickens steer, and Nick and Fetcher are the gasoline rats, as they eventually get Mrs. Tweedy off the truck, and Fowler hitches a ride, and Mrs. Tweedy explodes, and the chickens are safe on the Paradise Island, and make it their mission to free every single chicken. And the climax was fine and fun, as I had a good time with this movie, but not as good as the first movie, in my opinion. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 6.1 out of 10. I do like the returning characters, and Molly but not so much Frizzle, as she comes off like a bad influence to the point I don't really like her. And the claymation is fascinating to watch in this movie. The humor is funny, but not as funny as the first film, as it was clever at times. As this one is kind of funny, but I honestly wish the reveal of Mrs. Tweedy was not revealed in the trailer, as that didn't come off like a shock, which was kind of a problem for me. The movie was fine, as I did have a good time with the movie, but not as good as the first film, because watching this as an adult makes this mediocre, but as a kid, it's perfectly harmless. So I'm going to give this movie a mild recommendation for both kids and adults who watched Wallace and Gromit growing up like I did. So if you like the first film and if you like Wallace and Gromit, give this a look at, I'll say it. And it's on Netflix, so you should be safe with that if you have a Netflix account. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this Chicken Run retrospective. And until then, chicken! Chickens!